My name is Dr. Uminde, and in this lecture series, we discuss endocrine organs. So, basically, the histology of these endocrine organs in the body. Now, the endocrine organs, you need to know the differences between endocrine and exocrine, but you need to understand some terms. Okay, so we have if a cell, hormone is a substance, chemical substance that's produced by a cell to bind on a receptor, either on the same cell, the cell next to it, or the neighboring cells or a distant cell, and cause an effect. Hormone is a chemical substance produced by a cell to bind on receptors on the same cell or the next cell or neighboring cells, travel to a distant cell to cause an effect. Now, if the hormone binds on receptors on the same cell, that's autocrine effect. If the hormone produced by the cell goes to bind on receptor on the next cell, that's juxtacrine effect. And to the neighboring cells, that's paracrine. Now, if this cell produces the hormone, the chemical substance, releases it into the bloodstream to travel to a distant organ and cause an effect in that distant organ, that's what we call endocrine. Okay, so endocrine glands are ductless. They release the hormone into the bloodstream. Then this travels into a distant organ to cause an effect. A good example, the ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone in females. These hormones play a very important role in the cyclic changes that occur in the breast. So you produce the hormone in the ovaries, but the effect is at a distant site. That's the breast. Now, we have exocrine glands. Exocrine release their secretions through ducts. Good example, salivary glands, sweat glands, the pancreas, okay? So those are exocrine glands. But of importance now, we're going to discuss endocrine. So this thyroid is endocrine. It's going to release through the bloodstream. Sweat glands are exocrine. You have the gland here releasing through the duct. So endocrine are ductless. Exocrine have ducts, released through ducts. So endocrine is divided into discrete and diffuse. Discrete means the endocrine cells or the cells producing the hormones, they are clustered together to form an organ, like thyroid gland. But diffuse endocrine system, you have cells that are producing these chemical substances, but they're dispersed all over the body. And we call this the enteroendocrine cells, or cells with the amine protein uptake and decarboxylation system. So example of discrete endocrine glands, we have the pituitary. In the head, we have pituitary gland, pineal gland. The hypothalamus also plays an endocrine role. Those are the ones in the head. Then in the neck, we have thyroid and parathyroid. In the abdomen, you have the pancreas and the adrenals. Then in the pelvis, you have the ovaries, while the testes are housed in the scrotum. So this just shows you the location. You have hypothalamus there. Then the pituitary gland, the base of skull, the pineal gland, the thyroid with the parathyroids on its superior and inferior pole, the thymus. Thymus has paracrine secretions. It produces thymulin, thymopoietin, and thymosin that regulate the development of T lymphocytes. So it's paracrine. Then you have suprarenal glands. These are adrenal glands that rest on the superior pole of the kidneys. Then you have the pancreas there, which is actually both exocrine and endocrine. The exocrine will release enzymes through the ducts, while the endocrine produces insulin, glucagon from the islet Langerhans. Then in the pelvic region, you have ovaries in females, and in males, you have the testes lying in the scrotum. So a hormone is a chemical substance released by an endocrine cell. It will be transported in blood to a distant effector organ or target cell. The target cell must have a specific receptor for it. If there's no specific receptor for the hormone, it will not have an effect onto the cell. So thyroid gland. Thyroid gland is located in the muscular triangle of the neck. It extends from C5 to T1 vertebra. There is a right lobe and a left lobe that lie on the anterolateral aspect of the larynx and the trachea, and there's an isthmus that lies anterior to the second and the third tracheal ring. It's usually covered by a capsule. So if you're to describe the histology of the thyroid, it's surrounded by a fibrous capsule, and the capsule sends in septa to divide the gland into lobules. So this shows you the lobes and the isthmus. This is the pyramidal lobe that tends to come from the isthmus. So these are the lobes. So go back to the gross anatomy lecture series on the thyroid gland, the relations, blood supply, venous drainage, all that was discussed in that lecture. So the thyroid gland synthesizes thyroxine, which is T4, and triiodothyronine, which is T3. And these are important hormones that help with growth and cell differentiation, and they help to control the basal metabolic rate. Remember, thyroid hormone is important in metabolism of protein, lipid, and carbohydrates. So growth and differentiation of cell and control of basal metabolic rate by regulating the metabolism of proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. So what's the microscopic structure of the thyroid? We have a capsule that sends in septa to divide the gland into lobules. Each lobe contains thyroid follicles, so in total the thyroid gland has 20 to 30 million follicles. The follicles are lined by a simple epithelium. So this epithelium, when the gland is inactive, it's actually simple cuboidal epithelium, but when the gland is actively secreting the hormones, the epithelium is simple columnar. At the center of the follicles, you have a cavity. This cavity contains colloid. Colloid is a gelatinous substance, and the thyroid colloid contains glycoprotein, which we call thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin is a gelatinous glycoprotein contained in the central cavity of the thyroid follicle. Outside the follicles, we have what you call parafollicular cells, or the C cells. These parafollicular cells, or C cells, produce calcitonin. Calcitonin helps to lower blood calcium level. They counteract the function of parathyroid hormone produced by parathyroid gland. So calcitonin lowers calcium level. What controls the secretions by thyroid gland? The hypothalamus produces thyroid releasing hormone that causes the anterior pituitary to produce thyroid stimulating hormone. This travels in blood and makes the thyroid to produce thyroid hormone. But what reduces the production of thyroid? The negative feedback loop. So you produce thyroid hormone, but when it is up to a certain level that is sufficient and you don't need more production, you now send a negative feedback loop to the hypothalamus to produce less thyroid releasing hormone and the pituitary to reduce thyroid stimulating hormone. Therefore, you inhibit thyroid gland from producing more thyroid hormone. So this is a histology of the thyroid gland. When you see this on your slide, this is thyroid, classical for thyroid. Okay, so these are the thyroid follicles, simple cuboidal when it's inactive and usually simple columnar when active. At the center, you have gelatinous colloid containing thyroglobulin. And in between the thyroid follicles, you have parafollicular cells, the C cells that produce calcitonin. That's it. Physiologists will go into details on how thyroid hormone is produced, how the thyroglobulin contains tyrosine, and then the blood brings in iodine. Remember, you get your iodine from the diet. So as you bring in the iodine, the cells of the thyroid follicles are adapted for ion transportation. So they are able to get the iodine from the blood neurovascular structures around. So that iodine goes to the colloid and combines with tyrosine in the thyroglobulin. So you form triiodothyronine, which is T3, and then later on you form thyroxine, which is T4. That is tetraiodothyronine. So you combine the number of tyrosine together with the iodine, which you've been able to scavenge from the blood. That's how thyroid hormone is produced. That you'll be given the details of that in physiology. So you have your thyroid follicles, simple cuboidal, and the center you have your colloid, which is gelatinous thyroglobulin, and in between the follicles you have parafollicular cells that produce calcitonin that lower blood calcium level. And since it's an endocrine gland, remember you'll have connective tissue around that are carrying neurovascular structures. It's endocrine, so you need blood vessels to carry the hormone. So these are parafollicular cells in between the follicles. Goiter, enlargement of the thyroid gland, especially in especially in iodine deficiency. So the thyroid is trying to overwork with the little iodine that is there. Okay. Then parathyroid gland. These are outside the thyroid capsule, so external to thyroid capsule on the posterior surface of each lobe of the thyroid gland. So you have 4 parathyroid glands on the superior and inferior poles of the thyroid. So you can see your right superior, right inferior, left superior, left inferior parathyroid. Okay. So microscopic structure, it also has a capsule that sends in septa into the gland. The septa is carrying neurovascular structures, and you have 2 types of cells in the parathyroid gland. You have the chief or principal cells that produce parathyroid hormone, and you have the oxyphil cells and the chief principal cells. So the chief or principal cells produce parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone increases the blood calcium level. How? 3 major mechanisms. Okay. It will cause an increase in osteoclastic activity. Osteoclasts are cells in the bone that cause bone resorption. You break down bone and release the calcium from bone into blood. So you raise calcium level by increasing osteoclastic activity, bone resorption. Number 2, parathyroid hormone increases reabsorption of dietary calcium. So the calcium you take in food, there's increase in reabsorption of calcium from the GI. Number 3, parathyroid hormone increases the reabsorption of calcium at the kidney tubules. Instead of losing the calcium that has been filtered through urine, you reabsorb it back to the system. So you increase the calcium levels in blood. Remember, calcitonin produced by parafollicular cells of the thyroid counteract the functions of parathyroid hormone. We go to suprarenal glands, also called adrenal glands. These are glands that are located on the supromedial aspect of the kidneys, on the superior pole of the kidneys, and they're usually surrounded by the perinephric fat. So you have histologically, the adrenal glands have 2 layers, an outer adrenal cortex and an inner adrenal medulla. The cortex is divided into 3 zones. The outer zona glomerulosa, followed by zona fasciculata and zona reticularis. Zona glomerulosa produces mineralocorticoids, or aldosterone. Aldosterone helps with reabsorption of sodium at the distal convoluted tubules. Zona glomerulosa produces aldosterone for reabsorption of sodium at distal convoluted tubule, and when you reabsorb sodium, of course, water will be reabsorbed too. So sodium moves with water, so you tend to raise blood pressure. Zona fasciculata is the next layer of the adrenal cortex. It produces glucocorticoid or cortisol, which is a stress hormone. In times of stress, you produce glucocorticoid. Glucocorticoid help to increase the control metabolism of carbohydrate, fat, and protein, and it also raises the blood sugar levels. Then we have zona reticularis. It produces dihydroepiandrosterone, which is a weak androgen, okay, responsible for secondary sexual characteristics. So those are the 3 layers of adrenal cortex: GFR, glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis, in that order from outside to inside. So there really this is the suprarenal gland on the superior pole of the kidney. There's really no clear demarcation. Where does zona glomerulosa end, zona fasciculata, zona reticularis? But you just tend to see the change in the shape of cells. That's it. But there's no clear demarcation of the 3. But you need to know from outer to inner: GFR, glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis. Then the rest of the portion, the inner portion of the gland, is the medulla. So that's the adrenal gland on the superior poles. The details on the gross anatomy of the adrenal gland, go to the lecture videos of the abdomen. It was well covered, the relations, the blood supply, and so on and so forth. This is the inner medulla. The medulla of the adrenal gland contains chromaffin cells, which come from neural crest. Name 2 endocrine cells that are from neural crest origin: chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla and the parafollicular cells of the thyroid that produce calcitonin. So this is the histology of the adrenal gland: zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis. There's no clear demarcation, but you can see glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis. Okay, and this is the medulla at the center. So you need to know some clinical aspects, but this is more of physiology. So you need to consult your physiology notes. There's Addison's disease when you decrease adrenocortical hormone production. There's Cushing's disease when you increase adrenocortical hormone production. So go to your physiology notes and look at the symptoms of Cushing's disease and Addison's um,